Daniel chapter 3. How many of you remember this day 21 years ago? Everybody, I would say, just as some of you would remember Pearl Harbor when that happened, some of you remember the Kennedy assassination, some of us, I was old enough to remember the Challenger explosion. We all remember exactly where we were when we heard about the terrorist attacks on 9/11. I remember being at work and getting into the truck and having the news on and hearing about what had happened. Hearing about the first plane that hit the tower, and they weren't sure if that was an accident or weren't sure exactly what went on. I remember vividly seeing President Bush in the elementary school in Florida and the Secret Service going into the classroom and telling the president what had happened, and seeing the look on his face after what was told to him. I remember the time when the second plane hit the towers. I remember the Pentagon. I think maybe especially remember the plane that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I thought about talking to Brother Lee, but I didn't do it. But you remember the folks on that plane had heard through cell phone messages and through talking to some of the others what had happened at the Twin Towers and what had happened at the Pentagon, and they think maybe that the hijackers were wanting to go to the White House with that plane. Of course, nobody's sure exactly, but they thought maybe that's what was going to happen. And so a man named Todd Beamer, you remember hearing that name? Todd Beamer, and some of the other folks on that flight got together and made a plan. They said this was not going to happen. We are not going to allow. Now, that's not to blame anyone on any of the other planes. The hostage takers told the people on the other plane, just sit there, be quiet. We're going to return to the airport and we'll begin negotiations for your release. They were fooled into what they were thinking there. But these people on this flight said this isn't going to happen. We are not going to allow this to be a missile and kill a bunch of folks. And so they met in the back of the plane and they stormed the cockpit, and that plane went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, costing their own lives but saving many, many other lives by what they did. And I think about, he had two famous words, that gentleman, that Todd Beamer. He said, "Let's roll." I don't know if you remember that or not, but that was his words when they had got this plan together and they decided that they weren't going to allow this to happen. Those were his final words that were said where anybody could hear. And can you imagine the hurt and the anxiety and the pain, because these folks had made calls on the cell phones and saying, "I'm not sure what's going on, but we're not going to come home. I love you." The last words, knowing these were the last words that they were ever going to say to their loved ones. How hard that must have been. It still causes a lot of anxiety, causes a lot of fear for a lot of folks, and me being one. So after the terrible tragedy that happened on September the 11th, 2001, the nation did kind of two things. One, they drew together. We remember seeing our congressmen and women on the steps of the congressional building, and they were all singing "God Bless America." And of course, we know that unity that was shown that day was short-lived. It doesn't take too long to divide a people again. And then some people turn to God. When tragedy comes, either you'll do one of two things. You'll turn to God, or you will turn away from God. That is always your choice. It's never predetermined what you will do. We have been given, of course, our own free will to choose what we want to do. Well, in this case, after 9/11 happened, the churches were full, weren't they? Many churches, everybody wanted to return to God. Shouldn't say everybody. Many people wanted to return to God. So for a month or so after the terrible, tragic events that happened, many people returned to God. Some people, though, however, blame God, as happens. Unfortunately, people do blame God. And the question was, where was God? How come God didn't stop this terrible tragedy where well over 2,000 people died? How come God didn't stop this? Surely a loving God would have stopped this. Surely a God who cherished his people, surely a God who had any empathy for his people would have stopped this terrible tragedy from happening. Where was God? Did you hear that? Did you hear anybody ask that during that time after 9/11 happened? Where was God? How come God allowed these things to happen? What is my what I'm going to try to do for you today is answer that question, where was God? And I will answer it going through the book of Daniel chapter 3. And this is a very familiar story to us all. This is a story that we all know well. It says in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, and he set on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar the king set together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come in the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And the princes and the governors and the captains and the judges and the treasurers and the counselors and the sheriffs and the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar, the king, who hath set it up. And who falleth not down to worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning furnace, fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Self-explanatory. We heard this story since we were all in Sunday school. We've all know this story. But I want to go over it so that we know where God was on 9/11. We know where God was in this instance. Of course, we know that Nebuchadnezzar was a proud man, and pride, we know, goeth before the fall. We know that pride isn't, we can be proud of God and proud of the things that God has done. But when he starts building golden images, and when you hear the music, and you're supposed to get down on your knees and worship this golden image, we've got a problem. As Christians, we're not supposed to put anything before our God, are we? And we'll see here these 3 Hebrew children who were captives in this land, they had a choice to make. Were they going to bow down, or were they going to take a stand for what they knew to be right? We have those same choices to make every day. We can bow down to the pressures of society and what society wants us to do, or we can stand firm like that mighty tree by the waters with deep roots that are set on that firm foundation of Jesus Christ. We always have a choice to make. It says in verse 8, Wherefore at that time the certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, and spake and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, that thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not the gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now, when I was a child and I might see my brothers or my sister do something, and I would go to Dad and I'd say, Dad, you know what they're doing over there? You know who got the whipping? Usually the tattletale. That, unless it was so egregious that whoever was doing something got in trouble too. But I have no room for tattletales in my life. I have no room for somebody, hey, you know what? I don't want to hear it. You know, it's one of those things where if all you got to say is something against somebody else, it don't matter. I don't want to hear it. And that's all these guys were doing is going and telling on the three Hebrew children about, well, the music played and they didn't bow down. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar, he should have said, well, hey, boys, if you're so worried about what everybody else is doing, why don't you go jump in the fiery furnace? Why don't you go do that instead of worrying about everybody else? But as I said, when power comes and when we get so prideful, old Nebuchadnezzar, he wanted everybody to bow down to that golden image. He wanted to be God. It's not just that they weren't worshiping his gods. He wanted to be a god. He wanted that power. You see in many dictatorships around the world that they make statues of themselves, don't they? They make statues, and remember when we went in and liberated Iraq and all those statues of Saddam Hussein that were pulled down. He wanted to be a god. It says in 13, then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake unto them and said, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Is it true? Are these allegations which were brought to me against you, are they true? I want to get to the bottom of this. Is this true that you have not bowed down and worshiped? 15 says, Now if ye be ready, that at the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that ye shall deliver? Let me start that over. And who is that God, that's a big G God, that shall deliver you out of my hands? He says, I am the biggest God. I am the main man around here. There isn't anybody higher. There's nobody more powerful than I am. Who is this God who you think you serve, who's going to deliver you out of my hands? It's a dare to God, isn't it? It's saying, you serve a God, and you're pretty loyal to him, and you're pretty brave by not doing what I've commanded. Tell me about this God who you think you serve, who you're so proud of. It says in 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. In other words, we don't even need to answer you. That took a lot of bravery, didn't it? That took a lot of trust in their God, in God Jehovah, for these men to say, you know, O king, we're not even worried about you. We're not worried about what you think. We're not worried about any old golden image you got set up. We're not worried about anything. That takes some backbone, doesn't it? That takes a lot of backbone, because they know that fiery furnace is for real. And they know that the chances of them going in is a real thing. And they still take a stand for God. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. He says, if it be so, our God is going to take care of us. If you throw us in that fiery furnace, we don't have any worries at all. We're not scared. We're not worried about anything you can do to us. Doesn't it tell us in the scripture, don't be scared of the one who can kill the body, but the one who can kill the soul. Don't be afraid of the ones who are placing rules on you here on earth, but be afraid, be fearful of the one who is sitting on the judgment throne, that is Christ. Be worried about that. It says, so we're not, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. You believe that still? That our God whom we serve is able to deliver us? I certainly do. No matter what the circumstances, no matter how bad things get, our God is able to deliver us. It says, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods. We will not. We are not going to. And what a wonderful testimony that is to us. Even if you throw us in that fiery furnace, you can do whatever you want to do. You can lock us up in jail and throw away the key. You can do whatever you want to do to us. We're not going to serve your gods and not going to serve you. It says, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. You can forget it, Nebuchadnezzar. If we were brought before the king with those circumstances, would we be as brave as those 3 Hebrew children? Would we have the wherewithal? Would we have the faith in God to take a stand like these 3 Hebrew children have? It says, then was King Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and from his vestige was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So you stoke that fire. These boys have made their bed, now they're going to lay in it. These guys have made their choice, now they're going to have to live with it. I don't care anymore. I don't care if I had them over a province. I don't care what position they hold. They're not doing as they're supposed to be doing. You stoked that fire 7 times as hot as it should be. They're going to pay. And he commanded the Most High men that were in his army to bind, to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, and their hosen, and their hats, and other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was so urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it was so hot that the men who were going to throw in these Hebrew children, who did throw in these Hebrew children, it killed those men. His guards who took those Hebrew children to throw them in, it was so hot it killed them. That was a real fire. This is a real thing. And it says, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto the counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. You can look into a fire and you can see some things, and the king looked into the fire from quite a ways off, I imagine. 1, there's Shadrach. 2, there's Meshach. And 3, there's Abednego. 4. Who's that 4th? I know we just threw 3 guys in there, who's that fourth one? And it doesn't make sense. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Who's talking here? Nebuchadnezzar, the king. The evil king who set up a golden image of himself who's supposed to be worshipped. He recognized not just the fourth image in the fire, but he recognized that image as being Jesus Christ. He recognized in that fiery furnace, not just 3, but 4. And he begins to change. And Nebuchadnezzar came to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. You talk about a complete turnaround, a 180 just in like that. As soon as he saw the Son of the living God in there protecting his children, he says, this is the true and Most High God. Come forth, come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth in the midst of the fire, and the princes and the captains, and the governors and the captains and the kings, counselors being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was there a hair on their head singed, neither was their coat changed, nor the smell of fire passed on them. Can you imagine, church, that having been in this, I can't even imagine the fire. You push up a brush pile and let it sit for a little while, a dozer deck or whatever, and you set that deal on fire, and it's a huge fire, and it just goes, it burns hot. Well, I don't think those are anything compared to what we have here. I don't think those mean much compared to what Nebuchadnezzar had set up for these guys. But these guys come out without a hair on their head being singed. These guys come out with their coats not even burned up just a little bit. These guys come out of this fire with not even the smell of smoke on them. Why? Because Jesus was in there with them. Because Jesus was right there with them. And it changed his mind. It says, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their God. Where was God on 9/11? I want to read to you a little poem that was written. I don't know if it's a poem or not, or a little story. It says, you say you will never forget where you were when you heard the news on September 11, 2001. Neither will I. I was on the 110th floor in a smoke-filled room with a man who called his wife to say goodbye. I held his fingers steady as he dialed. I gave him the peace to say, honey, I'm not going to make it, but it's okay. I'm ready to go. I was with his wife when he called. As she fed breakfast to her children, I held her up as she tried to understand his words. And as she realized he wasn't coming home that night, I was in the stairwell of the 23rd floor when a woman cried out to me for help. I've been knocking on the door of your heart for 50 years. I said, of course I will show you the way home. Only believe in me now. I was at the base of the building with a pastor ministering to the injured and the devastated souls. I took him home to tend his flock in heaven. He heard my voice and answered. I was on all 4 of those planes, in every seat, with every prayer. I was with the crew as they were overtaken. I was in the very hearts of the believers there, confronting and comforting and assuring them that their faith has saved them. I was in Texas, Kansas, London. I was standing next to you when you heard the terrible news. Did you sense me? I want you to know I saw every face. I knew every name, though not all knew me. Some met me for the first time on the 86th floor. Some sought me in their last breath. Some couldn't hear me calling to them through the smoke and flames. Come to me this way. Take my hand. Some chose for the final time to ignore me, but I was there. I did not place you in that tower that day. You may not know why, but I do. However, if you were there in that explosive moment in time, you would have reached for me. September 11, 2001 was not the end of the journey for you. But someday your journey will end, and I will be there for you as well. Seek me now while I may be found. Then at that moment, you may know you are ready to go. I will be in the stairwell of your final moments. Written by somebody named Stacy Randall, and it's signed as she saw it by God. God was there. God was there in the most devastating moments in our nation's history. God is there in your most devastating moments. Some people didn't get that chance. Some people, I do believe, some people got saved on that day in 2001. The people above or below those floors where the plane hit, they had a chance to get right with God. The people on those floors where that hit may not have had that chance. They may have met death instantly. I want you to know today, before you walk out those doors, that you are ready. God doesn't leave us. He's always knocking on your heart's door. A lot of churches have that painting of Jesus Christ knocking on the door. You've all seen that. And in that painting, you'll notice one thing, that there's no outside way to get in. There's no latch that Jesus could open to push his way in. There's no doorknob. There's no nothing. All he can do is knock. What do we have to do? We have to let him in. We have to accept him. Yes, please come in. When Jesus saw Zacchaeus up in that tree, Zacchaeus invited him to his home. He made a change in Zacchaeus' life, and he invited him to his home, and he opened his door. And sometimes I wonder what keeps people from inviting Jesus into their lives. Some people may not believe there's a heaven and a hell. There is. We've got to be ready. We've got to know for a fact that we're ready to go. Every service I ever do, whether I know this person is saved or not, every funeral, I tell them, you've got to be ready. Your loved one who's sitting here, who's laying here in front of us this morning, they weren't expecting this would be their last day. Are you ready? Because there is a heaven and there is a hell. And God is not slack concerning his promise. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Whosoever surely meaneth me. Brother David comes and leads us in a song of invitation, and our piano players come, and I want you to think, is there a time in your life where you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior? If not, I invite you to do that today. Maybe you just need to come and pray. You can come and pray and take me by the hand and say, Alan, I want you to pray with me, or you can come pray all by yourself. You're not going to hurt my feelings either way. But if God's called you to come and make a decision or come and pray, I invite you to do that as we stand.